right, welcome. Those of you who see me on a frequent basis know that I don't normally use a microphone, especially not in class, so I'll try to be good with it today. All right, well, welcome to the Symposium on Hip Hop and Education. We will have our panel discussion now, and we have a tremendous set of panelists with us today. I'm not going to tell you about each one because I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, but so that we kind of know where, I'm going to step down for a second. Okay, this feels like more like class this way for me. I can see a lot of you recognizing that, right? So today we are going to benefit from the experience and the knowledge that our panelists bring. They all interact with hip hop and education in different ways. So there are a lot of things we can learn from their experience. Beyond thinking about how hip hop and education relate to each other, which we will talk about, we also want to think about policy implications because, as you know, a lot of times in class, I really like to stress that we need to change structure in order to make positive social change. So this is an opportunity to get some insight into those areas, as well as the just fundamental importance of education for a couple of reasons. First, it's really, as a society, our best claim that we provide equal opportunity through public schooling. Additionally, education is the key to empowerment. If you look up empowerment, it says that you need to be educated to be self-sufficient, and so education is just fundamental in so many ways in all our lives. So today we're going to think about that, forward thinking into empowerment, okay? So welcome to the panel. Thank you all for being here. And we'll begin by having each of the panelists introduce themselves, maybe tell us a little bit about their relationship between hip hop and education, and then we'll just get rolling, okay? So thanks. Well, you want?
Yeah, there's some empty seats. Why don't you move up?
Martha Diaz.
I can't see you back there.
Hip Hop and Education Center. Would like some of you to come
There's
on and move up.
Seats,
you see,
seats.
I'm not the only one that does this. Come on, you guys, move up. I'll just briefly tell you who's here and then let them begin to introduce themselves. We have Dr. Jeff Broome, Dr. Andrew Mannheimer, Martha Diaz, Devon Glover, Angel Hirai, and Matt Reeves.
You want me to go first?
Yes.
Hi, everybody. My name's Jeff Broome. I'm a professor of art education here at Florida State University, and I'm director of the Higher Education Division of the National Art Education Association. And so I'm coming at this from the visual art angle, which maybe is not what people would expect. And the other thing that people might not expect is when I say that I come at hip hop from the visual art angle, everyone looks at me and they shake their head and they go, oh, okay, graffiti. But not so much, really, to tell you the truth. Although there are lots of folks in art education that do talk about graffiti and hip hop. But more broadly speaking, I embrace just sort of the notion related to hip hop and education that we should be connecting to students' interests and connecting it in a way that helps them to take something that they're interested in and that they've experienced and take that and expand it into more conceptually difficult to grasp concepts. And so for me, what I've been interested in is how hip-hop music can be used to enhance critical discussions of any kind, but most recently I've been talking about how hip-hop can be used to help students understand difficult concepts related to postmodern art. And just to sort of amplify that, I became interested in this because kind of my age and the era I grew up in. You know, I'm 44 years old, and so I grew up in that era when hip-hop was certainly just coming into its own as something commercial, right? So I grew up, I'm a teenager, I'm a preteen when hip-hop finally is getting on the radio, and that older generations were saying, well, that's not music, and of course that made us want us to listen to it even more. And I remember for me, though, when I first started to think about hip-hop as a creative act, was, you know, I'm probably like 16 years old, riding around with my buddies after basketball practice, and somebody takes, yes, a cassette tape, because I am 44, you know, and they put in De La Soul in, and all of a sudden I'm listening to De La Soul, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what they've turned into a hip-hop song is something I used to listen to in 1979 when I was 6 years old from Schoolhouse Rocks, which was an educational cartoon that they'd play on Saturday morning cartoons. And all of a sudden, I started to think about hip-hop in a different way, and I started to think about sampling as a potentially creative act. So then you fast forward a few years later when I'm learning to become an art teacher, and somebody's introducing us to postmodern art, which is this esoteric, difficult concept to understand. And when my professors at that time are talking to us about postmodernism and appropriationism and recontextualism, all of a sudden I'm like, well, this is hip hop, right? And that's what I connected to. And so then as I became a teacher in my own, I thought, how can we take those ideas, things that kids understand from hip hop, to help them understand more difficult things about visual art and about culture? And I begin usually with sampling, appropriationism, and recontextualism as a jumping off point. So to wrap it up, because I know I'm a little long in my intro and I'll be briefer otherwise. Then when I become a teacher, first at the elementary level and then later as a professor, I started to try and put these ideas into practice. Never gave up on that idea. When you think you've got something that works, stick with it. And it became something that I used in teaching large art appreciation classes at the University of Georgia, where I used to work. Then it became presentations that I've given at the Florida Art Education Conference, at the National Art Education Conference, and in invited lectures, and eventually came into an article that I recently published in the Journal of Art Education. So I'm excited to hear how other people work with these ideas, and thank you very much for inviting me to be on the panel.
Hi, I'm Andrew Mannheimer. I'm a lecturer in sociology at Clemson University. I actually graduated from Florida State University in the Ph.D. program in sociology. While I was in the graduate program, I worked with Dr. Weinberg to develop the class that you are in, Sociology of Hip Hop. My dissertation research looked at secondary teachers' views and uses of hip hop. There's a lot of literature now out saying that hip hop can be used as an effective form of culturally relevant pedagogy. Usually these research or these studies have researchers come in who know a lot about hip hop. Maybe they practice some of the elements. I wanted to see, well, what do in-service teachers now, what do they think about hip hop? How are they using it? Have they been successful? Have they been unsuccessful? Have they had certain challenges? So I'm working on 2 papers right now, hoping to publish the results from the dissertation. I'm also an MC, and I'll be performing tonight, so make sure that you come out. As I look back, I'm very certain that I would not be a sociologist today if it weren't for hip hop and my involvement in it. Artists, they brought light to social issues, and also my participation in hip hop allowed me to connect with people from all different backgrounds. So I'm very grateful for hip hop, and I appreciate you all for having me on this panel. Thank you.
Wow, what an honor to be part of this panel. Thank you, Dr. Weinberg, for inviting me. My name is Martha Diaz, and I am a first-generation Colombian American. And being born here without any family, I just didn't have cousins, uncles. I didn't even have a sibling until I was 8 years old. I was isolated. I was a latchkey kid. I would come home. My mom wasn't there. I would watch TV. And then one day after school, I went to the schoolyard and I saw some b-boys breaking. And that blew my mind. And I got involved in hip hop and started to learn everything there was about hip hop. And I just wanted to understand, how can you defy gravity? And how can you do these things? And I just found a family, and I found knowledge, and I found empowerment through hip hop. And that led me to get into media. And I started to develop stories around hip hop and produce television shows, movies. And then I realized that hip hop was being used and practiced in different ways around the world. And I saw the power of education in hip hop, and I said, I want to help professionalize this field, because there are teaching artists, there are scholars, and the young people are graduating. There's all these programs, but no one is putting this all together, and I wanted to synthesize it. I wanted to create a platform and create an agenda that was for us, by us, unlike the entertainment industry. And so I'm a community organizer, I'm a curator, an archivist, an educator, and the founder of the Hip Hop Education Center.
Hello, my name is Devon Glover. I'm a writer. I have two monikers. Rappers have all types of monikers, but I write for the educational company Flocabulary under the name T-Dome, and I travel the world teaching Shakespeare through hip hop as the Sonnet Man. And I grew up with the passion of teaching my whole life, just growing up being the oldest brother, the oldest sibling, and taking care of my brothers. I used hip hop as a mentor, as a role model, as a father figure. In fact, the first song the first song that actually had me connected to hip hop was De La Soul, Me, Myself, and I. The first cassette tape, the first tape that I was ever bought by my mother was Tupac, Keep Your Head Up, which has anybody that knows those lyrics, it was just amazing. So I actually used hip hop as it actually shaped me to the man I am. I went to school for education, but I also performed, and I used to connect to me, myself, and I always used rap and poetry as a way to express myself. I was a quiet kid in school, and this was the way I was able to express myself to class and in the school, and actually and also when I was in Ithaca College, I was teaching in education. I was trying to find a way to connect the students, and I realized that they were able to recite a song off the drop of a dime, but they couldn't do multiplication. And so I started using hip hop as a mnemonic device for memorization and for studying and for education. And the reason why I use Shakespeare, the reason why I use hip hop for Shakespeare, when I first started doing the Sonnet Man, I was asked to help out. I actually avoided Shakespeare for years. That's the reason why I actually started as a writing major, and then saw my syllabus, immediately changed to math and computers to avoid him. And then a high school, a friend of mine asked me to come into school and help out with this book. It was Othello, and these students, and I realized when at first I started hearing a pattern, and when I started reading Shakespeare's word out loud, I noticed the connection to hip hop. Shakespeare has a lot of metaphors, a lot of similes, a lot of trolling, and I used that when we started reciting it, we started, I was basically rapping Shakespeare's word. So I'm kind of like a hip hop Cliff Notes, and when they came into the school, they actually they didn't even care that they were going to fail. They actually left their books in the class, but by the end of the class, they actually wanted to write better raps than what I brought. So they actually left with a thesaurus and with the book. And so I started using that as the inspiration, as the way to connect. If I can connect Shakespeare to these students that that myth that Shakespeare's untouchable. If hip hop can actually inspire them to pick up a book, I decided to try to make this a career. My two loves, and another thing, I actually teach 3rd and 4th grade math, and there was one time where I had a student that we were doing 5 times tables, and he could not do it. He just could not get the concept. But then there was a song, Chris Brown and Busta Rhymes, where Look at Me Now. And this guy knows every syllable. The whole class knew every syllable. So I started putting all my lessons into couplets and quatrains. And even, I started teaching in the era where even the 8- and 9-year-olds had iPads and iPhones, and so they would come in with perfect scores. And I did not know, I don't want to sell them short, but everybody was coming back with perfect scores for their homework. So but they loved to write, and they all, everybody wanted to write better than the teacher. So they, instead of giving them problems, I would say, hey, write 4 bars of a concept on how to multiply decimals. So I had them doing hip hop. I use hip hop as a way to do research, have them doing research, and having them expand their vocabulary. And Shakespeare, just the connection with Shakespeare, we actually take a lot from Shakespeare. There's a lot of connections in terms of his come up to being a playwright, to and being accepted in his world, to hip hop. You know, hip hop is only like 30 plus years old, and still, I mean, even though we're everywhere in ads and movies, we're still trying to find a way to get us, you know, accepted as a positive note. And I basically, just like everybody here, I like to connect hip hop in any way I can to inspire students to learn more and expand more. So, thank you for having me.
Hi, my name is Angel Hirai, and I'm faculty at Florida State University Lab School, which is a public charter school here in Tallahassee for kindergarten through 12th grade. I teach the K through 5 group of students. However, I also work with middle and high school kids, particularly those kids who focus in music throughout their academics there. I've been teaching for, well, 20 years, so yeah, I'm older. And throughout my career, and I've taught multiple age groups throughout my career, well, first and foremost, hip hop is the fastest way to win cool points with kids as a music teacher. If they know that you are willing to listen to it, because their assumption with me as their teacher is that I'm only going to play Bach and Beethoven and Handel, and that's it. And so the minute you put on something that they perceive as being cool, then you are also slightly cooler than you were previously. And but as an academic, I look at hip hop also as the direction music as a mode of communication is going. That we are music is a language that we use to express ourselves, and it has been used that way throughout time. So when I talk to kids, you know, I do talk to them about Beethoven, for example, and how he was using music as his mode of communication. But and then as we have progressed and as we have changed, and every culture uses music in different ways. But here in America, hip hop most definitely is a big part of our culture and a big part of how people use music to express themselves. And there's so much within that to talk about, not just language and rhyme and rap, but also talking about sampling and technology and the huge impact that hip hop has had on music technology in American culture. So there's a whole gamut of possibilities to use in the classroom, and of course they themselves love it. I mean, every opportunity they can have to have a microphone. Unfortunately, they're not very good at it, most of them, but it does give them an appreciation for people who rap. They understand, like, oh, this is hard, particularly if you improvise. Like, if you know, it's one thing to write something down and to practice it and read it verbatim. It's another thing to get up there and, you know, have a rap battle where you are improvising on the spot. Giving kids that kind of opportunity, they have an immediate appreciation for the type of intelligence, the type of wittiness, and the use of vocabulary, the understanding of vocabulary. Not to mention that you got to keep the beat. And so anyway, that's my gamut on it. That's where I come from. And thanks for having me.
Cool. Hey everyone, my name is Matt Reeves. I'm a hip hop artist, community activist, and also a basketball trainer. Ways that I've used hip hop to impact the community is merely just through the message and the rhymes that I recite, but also the popularity that comes from that has allowed me the opportunity to really speak to kids in a different way, being able to relate to something that they listen to. Typically speaking, when you're a basketball coach or you're some form of an educational person, there's a disconnect. Listening to hip hop, being a person who practices hip hop, allows me the opportunity to speak directly to these kids in a language that they understand. And so this is something that, you know, I actively push and pursue on a regular basis.
Thank you to all the panelists. So much information already. It's amazing. All right, so I guess you got it. We've got our feet wet now. We're ready to roll. Okay, so one of the things we kind of want to distinguish, we were talking about this before the panel began, and something to think about when you're thinking of education is that education doesn't just come from schooling. So a lot of what we're talking about today will be schooling, so formal education, formal schooling. But education comes from a lot of places, right? Experience, street smarts. So just to kind of make a distinction that we may be rolling it all in and calling it education, but do kind of keep in mind that we're mostly talking about schooling at this point, okay? So hip-hop, see, I'm with you, Angela, and I'm like, you put too many H's in a row. So hip-hop's impact on education is something that's been debated. There's some folks who believe that hip-hop encourages an oppositional culture, which may encourage kids not to get involved in school. But on the other hand, you know, it's cited as an example, and as most of you gave us examples of way hip-hop can be used in the classroom to connect students and help them perform better. So my question to you is, how do you believe hip-hop has impacted education? And we'll just start with whoever wants to speak first. We're not going to go in order.
I'm looking at Drew.
He called you out, Andrew.
Oh, so I have to go first then? If I get called out. Okay. Well, I think that right now there's been a lot of untapped potential with hip hop. If you just look at the element of emceeing, you know, there's an emphasis on advanced literary devices like similes, metaphors. And so I think that you have cases where teachers have incorporated hip hop into the classroom. Has anyone seen the documentary Waiting for Superman? Maybe a few people. They have a clip with Harriet Ball, who's a master teacher who used hip hop in the classroom to engage students. And there were other teachers who had classrooms right beside her, and they started using her methods as well, and they formed KIPP charter schools, which have been very successful. So I think that that's an example of hip-hop being incorporated into the classroom, and it's been successful. I think that there's this perception that it might establish an oppositional culture. I think that comes from maybe teachers, but maybe also educational policymakers not having the proper respect for the culture and dismissing it. But what I think is really ironic is the fact that what we consider to be the canon today was also dismissed in the past, you know? If you look at jazz, if you look at even Shakespeare, you're talking about Shakespeare. I mean, the thought that he would be studied in schools, many people would have said that that would never happen. So I think that I hope that we can learn not to marginalize cultures that have elements that can be incorporated into classrooms very effectively. There have been cases, but I think that there ultimately is a lot of untapped potential. So I hope that was okay for being called out. It wasn't. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna say growing up in Brooklyn, where embedded in hip hop, I would say that my influences, my favorite teachers, they were all big hip hop heads. That would all bring like a song a day that had a different message. And I was speaking in earlier today. I grew up, as a 12-year-old, 13-year-old. I just did not want to. I always wanted to go outside and play ball or play tag, whatever, and didn't want to read history. I remember we were trying to learn about teachers trying to teach us our roots in Africa, and I just would not open the book until I got the Nas Illmatic, and I got put onto the Grave Diggers, Wu-Tang, and they were mentioning the same countries that this teacher was trying to like screaming at us like, we're not paying attention. So, the fact that I was in, these artists that I would look up to and I see on the TV every day, they're actually saying the same language that my teachers were saying. That's what kind of inspired me to open up my books in class. And actually, hip hop is the reason why I actually wanted to get into teaching, get into education. So that I believe, again, to piggyback, I think it does have a lot of untapped potential, and I think because obviously, when when we see hip hop, if you're not like a true hip hop head, you only see hip hop through the TV, through the radio, and we all know what sells. You know, violence, sex, ignorance. But that's like, you know, that's a small percentage of what the real hip hop is. I was speaking earlier this week, and you know, I was talking with Dr. Weinberg actually about, you know, artists. If you buy an artist's album, they usually, you know, you're in a major label, you have to put out that party song. You have to put out that song that's just, you know, that fast food song. It's, you know, here today, gone tomorrow. That's what we call it, fast food. But you know, but if you listen to it, like one of my favorite artists is Jay-Z. You know, but if you listen to some of his songs, he's talking about his come up. You know, if you listen to his album, he's talking. Obviously I connect him because he's from Brooklyn. But you know, he's talking about, you know, coming from the projects, coming from the ghetto, his come up, and why he changed. You know, he has songs about regrets. He has songs about, you know, the issues that he had to go through. But they won't portray that because that's not going to sell. Def Jam is not going to get Def Jam any money. So all you're going to see is, you know, Jay-Z. He's glorifying how many girls he can get, how many cars he has, and they do that with everybody. So it actually is, you know, the media kind of puts that bad perception on hip hop, where there's a lot of, you know, the percentage wise, there is a lot of education in hip hop if you actually do the research.
So I was going to say that, and I had mentioned this earlier, that, you know, in a classroom setting, I talk more about the style and where the style came from and how it's been influenced by the styles that came before it. And for example, in jazz, you have syncopated rhythms, and you're also dealing with people improvising, and how hip hop has taken those concepts but developed in a new direction and created new sounds in that area. So that, if you take that apart, you know, you're not dealing with the cultural impact of hip hop in terms of it conveying a message that's negative to society. I will say, as a teacher, it's really hard to find hip hop that's been produced that I can play, particularly for like in older kids. You can get away with it, but with K through 5 audience, you know, you've really got to be very G-rated, everything you deliver, or else you're going to end up having confrontation with parents. And it is very, very hard to find music that is of the caliber you want it to be, but that is G-rated. And I will say, you know, you kind of hit on this topic. I think that hip hop kind of gets the blame for that, but I don't think that's fair because, like I said, hip hop, if you look at it as a style of music, then the language that's involved in it can be anything. And it's really, the real question ends up being is, why does our culture, you know, when you talk about hip hop was, you know, sort of the starts of hip hop, you're hearing cultures that are disenfranchised are talking about their challenges, are talking about their problems, they're talking about their real life. Why did those, instead of being seen as, how are we going to fix that, those things became glamorized? Why did our culture choose to focus on those things in a way that made them popular? And why has hip hop developed in such a way that now artists feel pressured to have those kind of things in their music? Because it didn't have, like I said, as a style, you can write any words, you know? So in a classroom, I can write a hip hop song with little kids and have it be about, you know, SpongeBob SquarePants, and it's still a hip hop song. And so for me, that's, you know, I think that's something to bring up with students too, because a lot of times they will say, oh, you know, that can be bad music, or their parents are like, I don't really want you using that in the classroom because I don't want them listening to this kind of music. And it's like, well, but it's not the fault of the music, it's the fault of our culture. That's what our culture wants. And to make sure that's an understanding about it.
You should look into Hip Hop Harry, which is a children's, like children's animal, right? Yeah, a bunny. Is it a bunny? Yeah, Hip Hop Harry, right? We're actually seeing a lot more K through 12 material rising. Lots of books, coloring books, videos. Once you bring hip hop into the classroom, it transforms the classroom. And that's the biggest impression that I see. That now, if you're using the principles of hip hop, you're not sitting in rows, you're sitting in a cypher, in a circle. You're facing each other. And that changes the dynamic of the classroom. When you use hip hop, you're collaborating, you're experimenting, you are doing peer-to-peer learning, you are doing blended learning. You're learning in the classroom, you're bringing from the community, you're going back and forth. There's a communication with the community. And all of a sudden, things become culturally relevant. So hip-hop is part of hip-hop, is part of American history, is American art, is American music, is American English, et cetera, et cetera. It's interdisciplinary, it's across the board. Every subject can be taught with hip-hop. Now, we see Malcolm X, we see Martin Luther King, now we see Chuck D, we see Queen Latifah. Now, all of a sudden, my music matters in what I'm learning. So you're connecting with young people. And teachers don't have to know it all, because all they have to do is ask the student. The student now becomes the teacher. So I think that the biggest, most important part of hip-hop in education is the transformation of the classroom.
And part of Lisa's original question was about criticisms of using hip-hop in education to promote, that it could promote oppositional culture. And, you know, I'm not a sociologist like you and Andrew, but the way I've seen some of John Ogbu's original work, and the way I understand that is that it sort of perpetuates itself, that it's not cool for certain peoples of color to do well in school, because that makes you white. That's part of the general premise? I'm on the right track here? And so what I would say is just that basic thought, that basic notion is worth exploring in school with older kids. Like, why would people think that? And so in some ways I see that as that criticism of hip-hop in education as a teachable moment in and of itself. And to bring it back to visual art, one of my favorite artists is David Hammonds, who was really active in the 1980s, African-American artist, and he was doing some really neat public work. So if I were to explore that issue of oppositional culture, whether it be in hip-hop or also visual art, is he has this really interesting piece where he would sit in Brooklyn in a public park with a great big telephone pole and just start nailing these bottle caps to this telephone pole in these really intricate patterns that often connected to other places in the Middle East and Africa. And then when he's done, he erected this telephone pole in the public park. And so it's 20, 30 feet high because it's a telephone pole, right? And he nails a basketball hoop to the top of it. And then he names the thing Higher Goals, right? And it sort of then opens it up to multiple interpretations, not just about oppositional culture, but about kids' goals for themselves, you know. Do you want to grow up, many kids grow up to be an athlete, right? Which is a noble goal, and I support that goal. But percentage-wise, it's hard to reach that goal. Mm-hmm. So it could speak to that. And also by titling it Higher Goals, what other goals could you set for yourself related to education? So, I love that it has multiple interpretations. And I think that speaks to the criticism of hip-hop and education as promoting oppositional culture, that's a topic we can talk about. Particularly, it may be more, to connect it back to Angelin, that might be more age appropriate for secondary students, but it's an important topic.
Yeah, so Dr. Broome, so speaking to what you were talking about oppositional culture, I mean, even just to begin to think about that, we're kind of defining public education as middle-class white culture. So Martha's reference to transforming the classroom, all of this is kind of the cultural relevance part, is to recognize that there's more diversity in our schools and to not expect children to have to put down what they know when they get to school and try to pick up something else. So yes, absolutely. And so several of you already kind of moved on to the next part I wanted to ask you, which was, what do you think that the challenges are with using hip hop in education?
Well, as a writer for FlowCab, is, you know, to try to put like algebra in a rap or calculus in a rap, Takes a while, but that's a good challenge if you like writing. I mean, coming from Brooklyn, there's really no challenge. I think the challenge is when I travel to other places and the perception that I will get from other, like, it's not really the students, it's really parents and the environment. You know, to go to like a town in like New Jersey, where I get, I mean, I don't even have to name a city, but you know, I would, you know, if I have to. When I get booked to go to like a school in New Jersey or Rhode Island, I get like the 3rd degree before I even go on. And I'm rapping Shakespeare, and I'm rapping education. In fact, my personal work has like, I mean, maybe like 5 curse words total, and it's about, you know, the government. It's about, you know, everyday issues. But you know, I get a 3rd degree about, you know, what are you bringing? Is he talking about violence? I mean, have you read a Shakespeare book? And I'm doing sonnets, which is about love. You know, they'll love poems. But I know coming out to travel to a different environment that, like right now, I work in Georgia. I do a residency in Georgia, and they knew I was a hip hop artist, but yet, you know, I got asked all these questions about what I was going to present, how I was going to teach the kids. I mean, I'm going to incorporate what they're working on, but I had to like make sure, you know, ease the tension and let them know that, trust me, there would be nothing but, you know, everything would be educational, and so that's the only issue I kind of have, other than, you know, the challenges of writing. But that's, you know, if you love what you do, you know, you take on that challenge.
I think one of the issues that education, or speaking from a community's perspective, I think one of the biggest issues is that a lot of times these kids from these disenfranchised communities, they don't see themselves within the educational structure. And I think that that's a big problem. And because you can't find something to identify with, this is what makes education as a whole unappealing. I had a teacher once ask, you know, why is it that all of these kids, they want to be rappers and they want to be basketball players, and they don't aspire to be teachers or police officers or firefighters? And I live in Staten Island, New York. Predominantly, I'm working in a predominantly white school, 4,000 students, 0.3% black. So I asked the teacher, when's the last time you've seen a black firefighter? When's the last time you've seen a black teacher in this school? How can I aspire to be something that I'm not physically able to connect to, that I don't see? So I think education as a whole has to make a huge attempt at being inclusive, right? You have to include the culture that you want to affect. If you don't do that, then there's always going to be this absence.
Going off of that, I think that it's very important to understand your students and to not have stereotypes about your students.
Absolutely.
In my research, because I wanted to document, or I just wanted to see how teachers were using hip hop, I found it can be very successful. There's also an irresponsible way of putting hip hop into the classroom. Mm-hmm. I had one white male teacher. It was his second week working at a school, 99% black. He's teaching science. He wrote on the board words like methodology, hypothesis, and he said, okay, get in groups. I want you to write raps using these words, okay? Right. Well, first of all, if you had practiced the art of emceeing, you would know that those are advanced words, right? Someone, you know, to expect 14 and 15-year-olds to be spitting bars with methodology and hypothesis, that's going to be difficult. And he was like, it wasn't very successful, and, you know, actually a lot of them don't rap. And I was like, okay, well, that's a problematic racist assumption that you're at a not, you know. So we need to talk about this too. You know, hip hop is not just some magic bullet, right? There are great examples, but I think that it also can be, and it wasn't just him. I had other teachers that were like, well, I thought if we just did rap, they'd love me, they'd love class, you know. But you have to understand the culture, understand the elements, understand the challenges of practicing the elements. So I'm glad that you all are responding well to the, you know, because I think that's important. And you can be critical. That doesn't mean we don't use hip hop into the classroom, but do it respectfully and responsibly, or else it can be problematic.
I think too, there's this issue of just in general communication that you have to be, as the educator, you have to be really clear with your admin and with your parents what your intent is what the goal is, what your child's going to learn as a result of it is, because otherwise they could see it as just mad chaos. And you know, you do have to be careful when you work with kids. If you just hand them a mic without giving them any like guidelines, all kinds of things are going to come flying out of their face that you didn't want to hear. And I think that with the kid, there has to be a clear communication, like, here's what we're doing and here's the goal behind doing it, which it sounds like that's what your teacher friend failed at. Like, he really didn't set like a clear, here's what we're doing and here's how you're going to achieve it. But then I think also, like I said, I've worked in one community I taught at was predominantly African American community, and when I first started there, you know, almost every kid in my class is black, and then I come in like, big white lady, I'm going to teach you about music, and they're just like, really? Like, and they figured out pretty quickly that, no, I'm a musician and I sing better than you do, and I could teach you something about it if you give me an opportunity. But beyond that, I actually connected with them. One was they had an after-school gospel choir, so I joined their gospel choir. And that was one way of connecting with them. The other thing was during lunch, I opened up my classroom and let kids hang out in there, and they immediately, all the rappers showed up because it was like a stage, all right. But I had to set that guideline of, you know, these things can't be said, these things can't be done, because otherwise I get in trouble and this all ends. And I found that they were so eager, so desiring to have that platform, to have that stage, to have that opportunity, that they are more than willing to meet the guidelines once they were created. But then, you know, I didn't really educate my admin about it, so suddenly my classroom has become like the greatest place on campus to hang out, and it's packed full of kids all wanting to be in there, and I've got, you know, kids in the middle, whoa, oh, yeah, and everything, you know, and the admin's like, what are you doing? Like, there's gonna be a riot. There's something crazy gonna happen in your room. And I'm like, no, they're just, they're having fun. But on their perspective, they see it as like chaos that's about to burst into violence, and we can't have, and so that's why I think that there always has to be that precursor of communication to avoid those kind of things when you're using hip hop. And
I think that speaks to an even deeper issue within the society itself, where, because predominantly the assumption is that hip hop is black culture, anytime you have a large number of black people congregating, you're going to incite a riot. And so I think that we also have to pay attention to that as well. The perception overall is going to be negative, not just because of the lyrics itself, but who the music is actually attached to. And so if we look at that and take a deeper look at that and just address that, I think that would help a lot as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I think one of the biggest challenges that we have with hip hop and education is that there's not enough research. There are a lot of great programs, but no one is documenting what's going on, how are young people learning, they're not measuring the impact. And so the more theses and dissertations that focus on hip hop and education, it will legitimize this whole idea of hip hop in the classroom. The first thesis that was written on hip hop and education was in 1987 by Dr. Thandi Harper, and she was the first one to write, you know, hip hop can be used to teach. The second thesis was written by Davey D, who's a journalist who lives out in the Bay, and he couldn't cite any books at the time. There were like 2 or 3 books on hip hop. One was, of course, Trisha Rose's Black Noise. Nelson George had one on the hip hop generation. And then there was someone else from the Black Studies department that kind of linked hip hop to black culture. But again, he couldn't find a lot of references to the artists that he was listening to, so he decided to cite the artists because he interviewed them and was able to do that as a primary source. Once we start seeing this and young people start citing these theses, then we can start legitimizing hip hop. So that happens, and then we now have a methodology. The teachers, the student teachers in academia can now learn from these papers and this research. And now teachers can learn about hip hop as they're learning about teaching. So this is where the gap is. Teaching artists, they're wonderful. They're great. They're MCs, they're visual artists, they're DJs, they're geniuses. But they have not been taught anything about classroom management, child psychology. So they're, on the other end, we need professional development. We need background checks. We need all kinds of things that, again, are going to legitimize the field. Finding resources, right? There's no one place except the Hip Hop Education Center has created a platform where you can find resources, where if you want to know who is your teaching artist, your programs in Tallahassee, you look it up, here, a list of people. Dr. Lisa Weinberg teaches, da, 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 da. You need that. So we're finally organizing, we're finally, saying this is our standard, and this is how we need to teach. And in-service teachers need professional development too, because they haven't been in school for 20 years, maybe 30 years, maybe 40 years, maybe 50 years. And so now it's time for them to also learn how to incorporate popular culture into the classroom, because that's really what it is. And the final thing I'll say, the smallest challenge is the cooptation of people who think they can come into the classroom and do what you said, right? Oh, you could rap. No. You have no right to do that. As a hip-hop scholar, as a hip-hop member, I have to check these people and say, no, you don't have to do that, sir. You can bring in a teaching artist that's going to teach them how to do this. And that's not going to happen in hip-hop education. It may have happened with Vanilla Ice in entertainment, but it's not going to happen in hip-hop education.
So excellent. I love the way you guys just take it and just run. That was fantastic. But so what Martha's talking about is something that we've talked about in the classroom, which is the institutionalization of things, right? So racism is institutionalized, right? And through structures, we can either reproduce inequalities and that sort of idea, or through structures, we can change things and make them different. So what Martha's suggesting is, that we legitimate hip-hop within education through structures, processes, education, standards, guidelines, and then holding people sort of to a certain credential. Right? So that's how it works. We have to institutionalize that change, and then hopefully that will impact stereotypes, concerns about potential outcomes. And so thinking of potential outcomes, let me ask you one more question as a group, and then maybe we can take some questions and answers before we run out of time. But thinking of education, and then how does hip-hop, do you think, help students looking forward in the future after they're finished with public schooling?
Nobody's. Come, go ahead.
I do think that at its best, that the topics that are introduced in hip hop can lead to some serious critical thinking, which is maybe the most important skill that we can impart upon our students, is to be critical thinkers. If as a father, like that's what I most want my kids to get out of school, right? Is that when they're come across a difficult situation, a new topic, can they think for themselves and think it through and to reach a good conclusion, instead of saying, I'm going to do this because everyone else is doing it. And I think if you're very selective and look at the topics that are introduced in hip-hop, that it does that extraordinarily well. And that you can use hip-hop in ways that get to those higher order thinking skills. And by higher order thinking skills, I mean that you're able to critically evaluate situations and topics and reach your own conclusions through criteria that you've thought through. And then, Angela, and you'll appreciate this, at the top of critical thinking is to be able to create new forms of communication, to get your own ideas across. So I think at its best, it offers tremendous potential in getting to those higher order thinking skills, not to mention that there's great potential in also teaching respect for diversity.
To piggyback, when I do workshops for students, and I actually get them to write. And even though I'm introducing Shakespeare, I usually get them to write for them to express themselves. I use that as a way of like a icebreaker, get to know your fellow students. And that's, hip hop has taught me that from, The Message, Grandmaster Flash and Furious 5, hip hop was used as the way from NWA, Express Yourself. They actually have a song, Express Yourself. Like my hip hop name came from Public Enemy, Welcome to the Terror Dome. Go from Terror Dome, but Public Enemy was one of the artists that I in De La Soul, two groups, Tribe Called Quest. Their messages. No matter what was being said, there's always a message behind their songs and the content. And it's just when I use it in education, I get them. It's a way for them to practice creative writing. It's a way to practice literature with them. And it's a way for them, a special way. I actually used it growing up that was the way I was able to share my thoughts and able to express myself. So that's the connection I have with hip hop and education, and trying to expand it more and trying to get it embedded in my students' minds.
Something that I think is almost an underlying theme is the spirit of an entrepreneur. I think that's just hugely pushed throughout hip hop, in addition to the mindset of being able to overcome any situation. And so when you look at that from the perspective of just a regular person, it gives you this sense that no matter what difficulties I'm facing, I have the ability within myself to overcome. I think more often than not, you see that people who come from an environment where they don't have resources readily available to them, that's actually to their advantage, because you have to be more creative. You have to be more resourceful because you lack so much. So I think that hip hop overwhelmingly stresses that.
Coincidentally, I actually started rapping because I couldn't afford any instruments, and I couldn't afford to sing to it, so that's how to jump on that.
There you go.
And I think just if you look at, artists who come together to make an album, you have graphic artists, you have engineers, you have people with advanced literary skills. So all of these skills are applicable in other fields as well, right? I know, I think that I started rapping when I was 12 and I performed when I was about 16. And I gave my first lecture in college when I was about 23, but it certainly helped me having been on the stage, right? When I see teachers nowadays, when they say, put away the cell phone. If you're an MC, you don't get to just say, put away the cell phone. You have to grab their attention, right? So learning that skill, I never say that in my class. I see that as my challenge, right? To make the students put away the cell phone. But that's just one example. I never got into engineering, but engineers, they have very advanced computer skills, right? And the tech fields, they want people to be innovative, and hip hop comes from people who are resourceful and innovative. So again, a lot of potential to be successful later in life.
You can definitely trace at least 200 careers in hip hop. Whether you're talking about the arts or Hollywood movies, music videos, you mentioned entrepreneurship. Now we're into venture capital, which of course, Jay-Z just opened up his venture capital firm, but he's not the first one. Nas has one, and Will Smith has one, and a lot of people don't know this, but STEM, we are definitely a multi-trillion dollar industry. We are part of the economy of this nation and globally. So when you go to the High School for Recording Arts in St. Paul, Minnesota, which is also known as the Hip Hop High School, that has been around for 18 years. You graduate with a portfolio, with a product, whether you're an MC or a filmmaker or an artist, you graduate with a product, a business plan, experience, because they connect you to internships where you're already working with Fortune 500 companies to get your experience while you're in school. You're set. You could go straight to work Or you can continue education and go to the McNally Music School where you can get a hip hop diploma. Or you can go to the Jimmy Iovine and Andre Young Academy at USC. Yes, yes, indeed. We are now in the academy building schools and programs. We still don't have departments, which we're working on that. We need our own hip hop culture department. But we are now seeing that this hip hop education in the classroom is going to help every child figure out their purpose, their calling, and they can take it in any direction they want.
Really quickly, I want to give the students a chance to ask you some questions before they have to go to attend their next class. So if you have a question, just indicate and I'll bring you the microphone. Yes,
Okay, so hello, and it's nice to meet all of you guys. My name's Erica. I'm an African diaspora and economics major at Florida State. And a sociologist by the name of Pat Hill Collins said true or correct knowledge she wrote in a scholarly journal. She said that true or correct knowledge only comes when a person separates themselves from the topic being studied. You can only understand it fully if you separate yourself and your personal ideas and your personal beliefs, if you separate yourself from it. And so I believe, do you guys believe that the only reason that it's so hard for hip hop to be propelled into education, because academia is like the people in charge and the people who support academia haven't separated themselves from hip hop, like whether you're on the white side of it or the black side of it or the marginalized side of it, like, do you guys feel like that's the only reason that it's so hard to propel and to get departments and get it to be incorporated in K through 12 education?
That and the fact that education, I believe, serves the purpose of a very racist agenda that's hidden, right? So I believe, yes, that as well as some other things as well.
I mean, at one point, there were 70% of the teachers were white women. And now we're seeing the baby boomers retiring. And I think that is creating a shift in a new wave of educators that are from the hip hop generation who are open to it. And so I think, yeah, we're moving away from that.
I also think we're trying to move away from that. You know, it's slow, it's gradual change, and that's the unfortunate part. But there is a side of academia that's really interested in critical theory and critical pedagogy that are looking to turn away from the canon. And in our field, in visual arts, the canon is a whole bunch of dweebs. And I didn't say dweebs, I said dweebs. That's, you all know what dweebs are? They're dead white European males, right? And so if you look at the art history canon, that's what it's full of. But then there are folks that are critical theorists that are saying, hey, we need to uncover all these wonderful artists that have been overlooked. And you know, I used to teach an art appreciation class at University of Georgia. That was one of those like 180 folks lecture hall for non-majors, non-art majors. And I always thought it would have been interesting to go around that room and say, name as many artists as you can, right? And I bet it would be quite a while before we got to a person of color or a woman, right? You know, maybe not in this crowd, but in that crowd, that would have been the case. And, you know, shoot, you mentioned the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. You got 4 of them right there. You know, Michelangelo, Donatello, Raphael, right? And then I said, now let's go around and name how many women artists or how many persons of color. But I do agree that it's changing. I just wish it wasn't glacial.
I think, too, that there's this other challenge, which is, so Jeff and I are about the same age, and you know, we were teens when hip hop really became popular on the radio, where it started to become more mainstream culture. And a lot of people our age at that time had strong opinions about whether they liked it or whether they didn't, because, you know, when you're a teenager, you kind of, you tend to group yourself as, you know, I'm a jock, or I'm a punk, or I'm a this, you know. And so for those in our culture, there's those people who attach to it and they love it and they like it, and then there's people who also, they have this, you know, well, I don't like it. I can't understand what they're saying. I don't like, you know, and you have to, that's going to be something that will be overcome as people our age phase out and people of younger generations phase in, because now it's just hip hop is far more common with my students. It's just
It's always been
another-
there. They've grown up with it.
Right, but now, I mean, kids are used to it. It's not a new thing for kids now. For us, it was a new thing that we were judging and whether or not we liked it. So whether or not someone in a position as an administrator or as a parent, whether or not what their association with it when they were a kid themselves has a huge impact on how they feel about it and their attachment to it. Whereas now with kids, it's not new. It's just part of the world they live in. So it will change. That's going to change no matter what.
And
the
I think
perception.
just education in general, we still, the older people, the older heads is still stuck in the traditional way. And because, I mean, there's sometimes I have to use different methods to reach my students that's not hip hop, but you have to change with the times and get more innovative in education, period. Hip hop is one way to do it, though.
Yeah, and I'll just say this final note. Black studies happened because we demanded Black studies. They didn't like Black scholars, they didn't like the Black artist movement, and you know what? We got in the door. And I think for us, the hip hop generation, which doesn't look black and white, it's diverse. We have Asian, we have Latinos, we have Russians, we have everybody. And so we are going, we're doing it. We're the movement. You're the movement. You're part of the movement.
Well, I'll say this, what I don't understand about educators is they think that the canon hasn't changed. Like, you study art, Van Gogh, during his time, wasn't he marginalized?
No one knew who he was.
No one knew who he was, this postmodern, or he was an impressionist, right? My mom's an art teacher, she'd get mad if
He
I
was
got
an
that
expressionist,
wrong.
yeah.
Right, okay. So, but the canon, you have radicals, who at the time they were radicals, and now it's, we have to study these people. Because it's part of, the canon is constantly changing. So I wish educators would understand trends that are going on right now and understand the brilliance of those trends right now, because I guarantee you, what was radical today will be in the canon tomorrow. We learn of Martin Luther King Jr., right? But when he was alive, he was arrested 29, 30 times, right? So the idea that he needs to be, and he's still been whitewashed. There's still problems with that. But the idea that we would learn about these activists in the schools at that time, that would have seemed like this radical idea. So when are we going to learn that the canon it needs to evolve more, and it has evolved? Mm-hmm.
It's more like a statement. I agree with what you're saying, because I think that hip hop is only viewed the way it is. Like people say that we don't want our children listening to hip hop because it encourages them to not get educated. But then we can't take one artist's story and make that every Black person's story or every Latino person's story. Like, that's how they feel. Education wasn't for them. They felt insecure being in certain arenas, and I feel like that's another major problem, is that we take these artists who are individuals and we apply it to a whole mass of people, and I think it's unfair, and I think that I think that is a drawback. It creates for drawback in the scholarly arena.
Yeah, and I agree. And the song Matt and I were talking about it earlier, They Schools by Dead Prez, which talks about Rickards High School here in Tallahassee, right? Powerful song. You'll probably listen to it when we talk about the education, right? Too often teachers will say, this is going to discourage kids from schools, rather than questioning why students feel marked. Why don't you question why there are these messages? Right. We're talking about that earlier. Mm-hmm. We have these social problems. Why don't you ask, why are these artists talking about these social problems?
Right.
Yeah.
So it is the end of our regular class time. That's
wait,
why
wait,
folks
no,
are.
don't.
I'm gonna give you time to say another piece before we go, but I know there are students that are probably sitting on the edge of their chairs thinking, I'm gonna be late for my next class, and I just don't want them to feel guilty if they have to go. So let's take a moment to thank our panelists, and then I'm gonna ask them to sum up. So Martha, I'm gonna start with you. Do you want to leave us with some closing remarks?
Well, I want to talk about healing and how hip hop is used as a form of healing trauma, and that's something that we're learning right now. There's a lot of research happening around hip-hop in the classroom, but also hip-hop as a form of therapy. A lot of young people who live in the inner cities or any violent city or rural place in America, they are traumatized. And so Beats, Rhymes, and Life in Oakland has been creating these community clinics where they're using hip-hop music and production to help young people express themselves and just vent and heal from their trauma and give them some sort of hope. And I think ultimately hip-hop and education is about hope. And that's what we do so well, and we can make a career out of it, we can heal, and we can build a legacy for the next generations.
Based on the positives and negatives of what people will say in regards to hip hop, because you know how people say if you hear something a certain amount of times, maybe there's truth to what is being said. So in terms of the negatives of hip hop, do you feel like there is truth to what people say about it, and it's if there is, then should it be changed, or should we in a sense of how you guys are embracing hip hop and trying to make it a good thing for education and for society, but do you feel like there's certain parts of hip hop should change their messages or how they come across or whatever that is in order to in the sense of how we have to accept it for education and let other people understand it? Should hip hop kind of change what they're saying to allow it to be accepted?
In order for hip hop to change, circumstances have to change.
Right.
And you have to remember, it's art. I mean, hip hop is an art form. It's a style that people embrace to communicate who they are as a person. And once you start implementing rules about that, or insisting on change, then you interfere with the artist and the authenticity, right?
And it's multi-layered. These lyrics are coming from some place, right? It's not just being pulled out of thin air, even though it may seem like that when we listen to the level of ignorance in some of the lyrics, but it's definitely coming from a genuine place. And so I think what has to happen is we have to start asking very specific questions. Why do these artists feel the need to express themselves in this way? Is this something that's really going on? Is it being made up? And if it's not being made up, then we have a serious problem.
Yeah. We can't censor artists, but we can control the media. And so I would ask your FCC commissioner and ask them why are they allowing this type of music to air on public airwaves, right? And then, that kind of sets boundaries. We don't have boundaries right now. And for the corporations, as long as it's making money, they don't care because it's not, affecting their community at all. But there is truth to the artists that are rapping about certain things. I'm reading right now a book that Lil Wayne wrote, a memoir that he wrote while he did 8 months in Rikers Island, a jail in New York. It's the most riveting memoir. It's funny, it's sad, and it takes you, 8 months, every day he wrote about his experience and how he had to negotiate being in jail as an artist who had already been a multi-platinum artist. And so when you read it and you see that he prays every day, that he loves his mama, you begin to see a human side to him. So I think when those artists are out there and we don't know how to bring it into the classroom, we have to find a way. Because out of the 12 songs that you hear playing on the radio of Lil Wayne, there are 2 or 3 songs that you're not hearing, that the media is not playing because it's too conscious, it's too positive. So we have to do our research. We have to be critical thinkers and do the work.
And I would say a critical thing is that you hear me mention over and over again. It's a big thing for me. So I think it's good to look at hip hop critically, right? You should look at anything critically, right? So So the question that I would have is, yes, I want students, if there's something that's misogynistic, I would want them to look at it critically too. But I always want them to dig deeper too. Like rock and roll is misogynistic.
Yes.
Rock and roll has historically been violent.
Yes.
Where are those voices? So then you start asking, who's criticizing hip hop, and it's the people in power. And so I think to be a critical thinker is good. That's a good thing, right? And not to take everything at face value.
Okay, I guess I have to start off with this little story because it reminded me when you guys were, because you're all educators. So I grew up as taking summer jobs as like, camp counselors and stuff like that. And I just remember one year I was a lead counselor and there was, it was like free play and some of the kids loved to just have this little boom box and there was like a set approved like pack of CDs that I was given as in like, hey, we went through these are good, like they're censored, so like even like some of the major pop songs that have like 1 or 2 cuss words in them, they're censored. So I had like one of those like now that's what you call music, and there was one particular song, it was like the token like hip hop song on the CD. It was Rihanna and Young Jeezy's Hard, which I mean, if you listen to the song, it's pretty much predominantly like, oh, like I'm overcoming this struggle, like don't give up now, like. And the kids, like some of these kids, like loved this song, like it was their favorite song, and they're sitting there, they're dancing. Some of these kids are like break dancing and what have you. And I just remember the head coordinator coming, busting through the doors, and she was like, "Why on earth are you playing this song?" And I was just like, "What do you mean?" And she's like, "We don't want parents getting upset." And I was like, "But you gave me these CDs for one." But besides that, and it just got me thinking. After a while, it's like, especially in Dr. Weinberg's class now, it's just like, why are certain songs not okay? And like, and now seeing this panel right now, you guys talked about how like we're trying to incorporate hip hop in the classroom, and there's a lot of sometimes there's backlash for, trying to get parents on board. What has been like the easiest way for you to bring parents on board without them just being like spot on, like, no, this isn't happening? And because I could always see that struggle happening.
Give their kid a solo.
Yeah.
That's the easiest way.
It's just, with people being so close-minded, and just like, how do we get them on, like, what's the easiest way for them to be like, hey, like, before you shoot us down, even though there's research to back this up, because I actually used an excerpt, this article that was written about, like, I think it was from the University of Michigan, and how they like conducted studies in their science labs about how like hip hop and the beats can actually help close the achievement gap between minorities, because anytime you could put something that relates, like I guess that they can relate to, or something that helps them like feel like they can better understand it, they put it on top of a beat, and they were like their memory capacity was just skyrocketed. So
That's true for all cultures, but
yeah.
I mean,
but
the research focuses specifically on minorities, but you could say that's true for all people, because our heart beats. So the minute you give something a beat, it becomes part of you. Your body takes it in. But
I think just to answer your question, I think one of the things that for me is I've never tried to sell parents on accepting hip hop, because I know that the disconnect comes from a racial issue more often than not. So what you're essentially trying to do is, you're trying to sell parents on accepting black people. And that's something that I think, again, we have to look at. Like we want it, because race is not comfortable to speak about, right? So we want to look at this issue here, right? And say, okay, well, how do we get them to hip hop? Well, the issue's not hip hop. It's really not, because it's fine if Macklemore does it, right? But now if we put it in another context, then it's completely different. So it will be fine. That same song would be fine if it was Macklemore instead of Jeezy. It would be accepted. So I think that that's something that we have to really look at deeply and understand that this is something that goes on in this country that we really don't want to address, but we need to.
I think the other thing is, as an educator, you can't ever write curriculum with the expectation that everybody's going to like it, because they're not. It doesn't matter what you do, you're always going to have some parent who complains about it. I mean, I did a concert of music from around the world, And I had parents complaining because the concert wasn't all about Christmas because we're a Christian nation and I'm teaching them about other religion. I mean, you know, and you're just like, the fact is you got wackadoo parents and that's how it is. In every community, there are wackadoo people. That's the reality. It doesn't matter where you go. I mean, anywhere there's more than 50 people, somebody's crazy, you know? And so you can't create curriculum with that expectation of appeasing everybody. What you do have to do is, like I said earlier, you have to make sure your lines of communication are clear, that you know why you're teaching it, you know why you're playing it, and that you pick that song because of this, like, I'm playing this song because of this reason. And then you also have to make sure that you've got your support from your admin. Because if your admin's on board, then you've been able to clearly say, this is why this has integrity, this is why it's important, this is what it's doing, here's the research that backs up that this is going to do something in my classroom, and your admin's on board, then that's your barrier, so that when your parents call and complain, it's your admin who's like, no, she knows what she's doing.
And I would say that there's been teachers that have been fired for bringing hip hop in the classroom, but that was like 5 years ago. Now,
all of 5 years ago.
Yeah, five years ago. But now, what teachers are doing are they're communicating with parents and saying, I'm going to play this in the classroom. You're more than welcome to join us. And especially now, parents are younger. Right? Mm-hmm. So the kids that you're teaching now, they have parents from the hip hop generation. So in some cases in New York, they actually know the lyrics to the songs that are playing and they will participate. So actually you're teaching the student and their parents and your administrators. So I would be very open to bringing parents into the classroom and getting their support. In Portland, they did that, and the teachers teamed up with the parents to make sure that culturally relevant pedagogy was being taught in the curriculum, and hip-hop was on the top of the list. And it's so funny because there's a video of the city council meeting, and two, maybe 8 and 9-year-old young people were talking about, yes, because it's going to be important for us young people to see our culture in the classroom. And let me cite my favorite rapper, Nas. I know I can be what I want to be. And I was blown away. And the city council passed it, no problem.
Policy, structure, that's where it needs to happen. So, great sociological insight from Angelin on parents can be wackadoos. I think that was an important point. And further, like, think about this last little piece we talked about. Let's just critically think about that for a second. So we're sitting here saying how hip-hop needs to be legitimated to use it in the classroom, how we need to get permission, how we need to clear it, how we need to be clear about our goals, how we need to be out in the sunshine about what we're doing. We should be doing that about anything we teach in the classroom. And we can reach a point in education where we're not setting hip-hop aside and saying, okay, this has to jump through extra hoops. We should either be evaluating everything on those terms or move on, right? So even the fact that we recognize that we have to take an extra step, right, to use things that are beneficial in the classroom indicates the kind of conflict perspective we should be using here. So I want to thank you all for attending. I want to thank our panelists again for being here, and we'll probably have a minute or two if you want to speak to them individually. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.